Bigfoot, Bigfoot, roaming through the land. Bigfoot, Bigfoot, a hairy ape-like man.
Well, hello, my friends. Welcome to another episode of Bigfoot Today, the show that's all about Bigfoot. I'm your host, Stephen Major, and with me today I have a very special guest, Mr. Cliff Barackman. How are you doing, Cliff?
I'm good, thanks.
Thanks so much for being on the show. I really appreciate you being here.
That's my pleasure. I'm always up for talking squatch.
Wonderful, wonderful. Well, I like to start out with my first question for every guest is, where did this journey in Bigfoot all begin with you?
I guess when I was a little boy, just because I grew up in the 1970s. I was born in 1970, so growing up during that time, I was subjected to a lot of those early schlockumentaries, the In Search ofs and, the Boggy Creeks and all that sort of stuff. And I also loved monsters. That's a key factor here, like Godzilla and all the old, classic Universal monsters, Wolfman and Dracula and all that stuff. I grew up on all that stuff. My mom enjoyed those movies, so I saw them too. And so when, In Search of was on, there's crystal skulls in Atlantis, and I thought all that stuff was neat, UFOs. But then when the monster stuff came on, like possible living monsters, that really caught my attention. But at that point, it was just a child's fantasy sort of, that would be cool, fun sort of thing. And I'm also an extraordinarily eccentric individual, and I always have been. So fast forward a bit, I'm keeping these strange, quirky interests and whatnot. When I was in college, I had a few-hour break between classes, and I have a degree in music, and the music department was way on one side of campus, and I found myself way on the other side, like literally a 40-minute plus walk. And so the break was long enough, I needed to do something with it, but not long enough to go back and rehearse or put practice in or something like that. So I stayed on upper campus, and I decided to go in the library during this semester and basically pull books off of the shelves in subjects that I was interested in, which is at that time and still now mostly science. Really? I'm a science nerd. I love science of all sort. In fact, I was a major in various sciences until Calculus 2 dissuaded me. Whatever Calculus 2 is, I didn't want to do that for a living, so I decided to do something else. But I was wandering through the anthropology section one day, and I came across a couple books that were essentially compilations of scholarly articles written on Sasquatches by anthropologists. The Halpin and Ames book, like Man Like Monsters on Trials, or the Scientist Looks at the Sasquatch. I think Sprague was the editor of that, and So those were the books that really turned my head and was, oh my God, Bigfoot, funny and quirky and everything I love, but they might be real. Because when I started reading about the evidence, I saw no other reasonable conclusion other than these are almost certainly biological animals of some sort. There's really no other good explanation for all this stuff that's going on. And so I basically was already camping and backpacking and doing stuff like that. So I just kind of started doing that in areas where Sasquatches had been seen before.
And this is why you were in college?
Yeah, about 1993, 1994.
Okay, so that's when you started kind of
taking it seriously. Like I've always been interested, but the page turned, and I started taking it very seriously in the early 90s at some point.
In the 90s. And then during that time, when was your first significant encounter personally with evidence?
Well, actually, it was that summer. Just beginner's luck, because a lot of weird, quirky things happen in Bigfoot and fishing and all sorts of random events. Beginner's luck is a strong thing. It's a strong thing. I don't know, coincidence, I suppose. But the first time I was out, I found footprints that to this day are still rather befuddling for me.
First time out.
Yeah. And I go, this is going to be easy. But no, it turns out, no, it's not easy at all. But found pretty interesting footprints, 14.5 inches long, and that just kind of set the hook, And I was at Bluff Creek, too. I decided to go try to find the Patterson-Gimlin film site, which is a horribly naive thing to do back in 93 or 4. But I camped at a place called Bigfoot Creek, where Bigfoot Creek flows into Bluff Creek. Little did I know, I found out later from a Yurok gentleman, that is called that because, according to the local indigenous people, that's where Sasquatches go to fish for steelhead at that particular place. So,
I've always wondered about Bluff Creek. Never been there, but is there a lot of continuing activity in that area? I mean, today,
they're still there. They're still absolutely still there.
Still stuff going on.
Yeah, I'm not aware of any recent sightings from there, but around that area, stuff happens, like Witchpeck and that sort of thing. There was a handprint on the side of a house in Witchpeck, I think, last year. Yeah, they're still in the area, definitely. But as of it's kind of hard to go there now because so many Bigfooters go there.
Yeah,
but I was there in September, and I was only there for 2 nights, and I didn't see anybody back there. I went to the Patterson-Gimlin Film. So I take that back. No, I did run across Rowdy Kelly and then a gentleman from Spain who's writing a book. They were coming down to go to the PG Film site when I was walking up the hill from it that day.
Is it pretty difficult to get to it?
The Patterson-Gimlin Film site is located now. So in the Bluff Creek project, a bunch of dudes, and I don't know if there's any women in there or not. So I'll just say a bunch of dudes have kind of started clearing the place out and have built a trail back in there. You can park about a mile or so from it.
Oh, that's not bad.
No, it's not bad.
Yeah.
It's not bad at all. Half of that's downhill, and the other half is upriver. Of course, on the way out, it's uphill. You have to remember that. But it's not that hard to get to. It's a little bit. You got to walk across the river a couple times and beat the bush and go through it a couple times. But the trail is present, and if you know where to walk, you can just walk the ill-maintained trail all the way there.
I've never really got familiar with it until I watched that. I did watch a movie like a couple months back. It was called Bluff Creek. It was produced by Bobcat Goldswaith, I think.
Oh, Willow Creek is called.
Or Willow Creek.
Yeah, Willow Creek. Actually, that's where I met Bobcat Goldthwait.
Oh, no kidding.
Yeah, I was on an expedition to Bluff Creek at the time because I made contact with Jerry Crew's children, and and located the original cast from 1958, which had been lost to time. Kind of nobody really knew where it was, and then. Jerry's son, John, had a bunch of artifacts from his father, including a map, several maps. One of the maps was on a brown paper bag. Bob Titmus drew the map. The map was drawn for Bob Titmus, where the footprints were. And on the back of this paper bag was Bob Titmus's beautiful flowing script saying that this has to be a large human of some sort, and blah, blah, blah. And then he also had, John Crew in his collection had a map of Six Rivers National Forest, which is the national forest that Bluff Creek is in. Yeah. And on that map, it was a 1954 map of the National Forest. And on that map, Jerry Crew himself, in a blue ballpoint pen, drew the road that he built into Bluff Creek. And just by memory, he did it. And then drew on that map where the footprints were found. And of course, that was the event. I'm not sure if you know the Bigfoot history like I do. Yeah. But Jerry Crew was in 1958. He cast the first Bigfoot footprint cast that is still in existence.
Yeah, the first cast, and that's where the term or the paper that wrote about it, if I'm correct.
Genzoni was a guy's last name.
Yeah, and they used the word Bigfoot.
They used the word Bigfoot. Now, according to John, his dad actually started calling the animal Bigfoot before it hit the papers. So according to John, his dad invented the word Bigfoot. Yeah. But what's interesting is just a few years before that, I want to say 1956, there was an old TV show called Death Valley Days. And it was an old Western held, the setting was out in the Owens Valley of California, Death Valley area kind of, but Owens Valley is a little bit further west. And one of the episodes there, it was called Mr. Bigfoot because there were these large 18-inch footprints left in the ground around the water supply, and it's a fanciful sort of, it was fiction, like 1950s cowboy fiction. It's terrible. But they did have a drawing of this big footprint, and it was 18 inches long. They had the measurements on the drawing itself. So I'm wondering, was Jerry Crew a fan of that television show?
Dude, that's wild because I remember the show, and I could vaguely remember previews when I'm a kid, but that would be the first old time Western show or something where they would actually talk about a Bigfoot monster.
Well, yeah, that's the first time anyone has used the word Bigfoot in association with large footprints, that's for sure. Historically, I believe that's accurate at this point.
Yeah. Now, correct me if I'm wrong, wasn't there some controversy about the possibility that the tracks were, he made those tracks?
Jerry Crew?
Yeah.
I'm not sure anybody really ever questioned if Jerry made those tracks. And if they did, it's totally unfounded because Jerry was really a pillar in the community. He was a widower, and he used to go around and pick up children in a bus or a van to go bring them to Sunday school. He was just a pillar of honesty and kindness and generosity in the community, and everybody respected and liked him. The issue surrounding the Jerry Crew footprints is that Jerry Crew was a subcontractor building a road into the Bluff Creek Valley. The contractor himself was Ray Wallace. And Ray Wallace later went on to become one of the most notorious hoaxers ever. He had his wife in monkey suits. He'd make these fake footprints that were easily identifiable and drop them all over the place. And he was kind of around. But Ray Wallace is on record as saying, like, I didn't make those prints because, like, why would I do that? It cost me about $40,000 over those 2 years because I had people quitting all the time because a lot of the workers were indigenous people and the native people of that area. They all knew about Sasquatches.
Right.
And they just said, well, I'm not going to work on this because that thing's here. It's like ill omen or just bad news or bad luck or whatever their beliefs are. I don't know. And they just would quit. They had a hard time keeping people on the job because of those footprints. So Ray Wallace is saying, well, why would I do that? That's stupid and crazy. That cost me so much money.
Wasn't there, in addition to finding tracks and stuff, wasn't it like picking up barrels of oil or drums and
that's what they
stuff
say.
around?
That's what they say. A lot of those reports apparently have been overblown a bit, not quite as accurate. Although that's a real common motif. I get people in. I own a Bigfoot museum, the North American Bigfoot Center. Yeah. I get people probably every month or two in there about how their uncle worked on this road building or this logging crew, and then the barrels were thrown around. Yeah. So that seems to be now a common motif amongst the stories. Although I've never seen any actual evidence of it. However, there were pieces. I mean, it might be true. I'm not saying it's not true. I'm just saying that that's a gray area, whether that's actually happening or not. But it has been shown that, say, Bob Titmus, for example, was walking around this road building crew back in 1958 after the footprints were found. And way up on the hill, he found big coils of baling wire and things that were used to strap the culverts together for the road crew. Yeah. So apparently the animals were carrying things around and doing some stuff with it, but we don't know exactly what went on because so little of that was well documented at the time.
Yeah, it's been a long time since I read much on that. I mean, talking years, but I remember there were some other things like stuff had been moved or carried around.
Yeah,
and
that
stuff.
seems to be true. Yeah, to some degree.
Yeah. Well, since you brought it up, I want to talk about your North American Bigfoot Center. I was going to get to that later, but since you brought it up, let's talk about that now because it's pretty fascinating. I think what you're doing there, and I'd like you to elaborate on it. The North American Bigfoot Center is Cliff's museum, and when did it open?
Oh gosh, it was about 3 years ago. I mean, we were officially fully open with the exhibit halls and all that stuff in October 2019.
Yeah, and it's located in Boring,
Oregon, right on Highway 26 at the Boring off ramp. It's easy to find. Actually, it's not that easy to find because the GPS puts it about a mile and a half down the road. But we are a Bigfoot museum. We shouldn't be that easy to find.
Yeah. Well, one of the things in our discussion we'd have and that I found fascinating is not only is it a museum where you can come and see things, but you're on a real quest to go after and locate historical artifacts related to Bigfoot. Yeah. Like you had talked about with making the run up there to what's north of us again? I forgot about that place.
What's north of what?
North of us here in Spokane, where you were.
Oh, Bossburg.
Bossburg, yeah, the Bossburg stuff. You've done some significant investigation in that. And could you tell us a little more about what you've been doing and how you've been running around getting these artifacts?
Yeah. The museum basically has a three-pronged approach to our existence in general. I mean, at the end of the day, it's a way to fund my Bigfoot addiction, essentially, and get really good. But that's beside the point. That's the umbrella that it's all under. Really, our three prongs are educate the public on what Sasquatches are because they are real. They're really out there, and it's our job to try to put the truth forward as we see it and just kind of educate people. We don't want people to be afraid of the woods. We don't want people to never go enjoy the woods. We want people to enjoy the public land and protect it because that's at this point the only thing we can do to protect Sasquatches and we own the land. The United States citizens own the land. We shouldn't always be sending them out to corporate interests and whatnot. That belongs to us. We should treat it as if it is our own backyard that we own because it literally is both of those things. A second thing is that we do field work all the time because obviously having a Bigfoot museum in outside of Portland in the Pacific Northwest and with my name attached to it, because I'm kind of a figure in the Bigfoot community. People have seen me on television for a long time and things. We get a lot of stories. A lot of people who may not want to tell their stories publicly could come tell us. And some of those stories happened 3 days ago,
Yeah,
we get a lot of reports. Like on a good summer week, we might get as many as a dozen or more reports in the shop. And this stuff like, I saw one back in '93, and they tell us a story, and we dutifully write it down and take record of it and put a dot on the map, that sort of thing. But sometimes stuff happens yesterday or this morning, and we get news of those things. So we immediately go out and try to collect whatever physical data is left there, whether it's footprint casts or hair or whatever is out there. Many times it's nothing, but we go anyway. We always go. And that's the second prong. And then the third prong, which is one that I'm really excited about and my heart's really behind, is trying to find, locate, and protect, basically curate historical artifacts of various ways.
Dude, like I said, you are the Indiana Jones of Bigfoot.
Yeah, I'm just some Bigfoot nerd that cares.
But that's beautiful that you do that. And you've been all over the country and you've really uncovered some
Well, yeah, some interesting things have come our way, and I've got my line on a couple others, and I'm trying to make it so the North American Bigfoot Center, even after I'm dead and gone for a long time, is still this place that people can put their collections and know that it's going to be taken seriously and put in a place of honor. Because a lot of Bigfooters, are even amongst their own family are kind of looked at and like with sidelong glances and like, what's Grandpa up to? That sort of stuff. And when they die, the families sometimes don't know what to do with the collections. And so well. These collections have value. The data is still relevant, and they should be used for further educating about the subject. And to those ends, we're building an archive, an online archive.
You're doing an online thing.
Yeah. Right now it's all private or whatever else, but it's just now starting to crawl. We're just starting to get going on this because we've already acquired several significant collections from historical Bigfooters. Chuck Edmonds, for example, his family left his stuff to us. Barbara Wasson, we have the Barbara Wasson collection, and she's a huge historical figure in the 1970s, one of the early female investigators when it was even more of a sausage party than it is now. It's a pretty male-dominated subject, but even back in the 70s, it was even more so. And she's one of the early female investigators. We have her entire collection, all her personal correspondences with Renata Hinden and John Green and all sorts of people. It's a fascinating collection. Dr. Leroy Fish, we have some of his possessions as well. We have a couple historical pieces from the Freeman collection bestowed to us by Michael Freeman, a good friend of ours, Paul's son. Anyways, you can see that we're just starting to get going because we've only been in existence for 3 years. And so we're working hard to get that aspect going because you mentioned the Bossburg incident north of here. Bossburg was back in 1969, 1970, and early 1971. People said, okay, well, we'll put that to bed. It's a cold case, essentially, at this point. It turns out, no. What I've been finding is that whenever you take a look at one of these old cases that we all think we've learned as much as we can, there's still water to be wrung out of that rag. Just by my brief 2 or 3 month investigation into the Bossburg incidents, 3 new casts came directly to my hands, and I know where 2 more original casts are. That's 5 casts total that no one really is aware of for the most part, and that's significant.
With that, when I compare that to the event during that time, but the Patterson-Gimlin, they got to film and everything, but I always thought that this Bossburg incident was kind of overlooked to a great degree, even though there was a lot of big names that came up.
Oh yeah, Roger Patterson was here.
And all that, and then it was kind of just lost to history, I think.
Well, because I think that people thought it was just put to bed and done. And also Ivan Marks kind of was involved in a lot of that. I mean, Ivan Marks went on to do a lot of hoaxing, and so at that point they said, well, let's forget it, because Ivan Marks was involved. In fact, I wrote Peter Byrne. Peter Byrne's still alive. He's 96 or 97. He's out on the coast of Oregon. And he was there. So I wrote him an email, not that when I was looking into this Bossburg stuff, because I was curious about if he knew maybe how many casts were involved. I forget what the question because he was there, and I wanted to know some little factual tidbit that I thought he might still remember. And he didn't answer my question. He says, Cliff, Ivan Marks was involved in that. You'd be better off just to drop the whole thing and not pay attention to it. And I didn't get my answer.
Yeah.
So, well, okay, well, I respect that, Peter. I understand. But I would still like to know how, whatever I asked. Because whether it's real or whether all that stuff is hoaxed or not, and I don't think it is, by the way.
Yeah.
There were real things going on in Bossburg, and Ivan Marks happened to be tangentially involved, and that kind of put him on the road towards making he made a fake film associated with the Bossburg events, etc.
Did he live around Bossburg?
Yeah, he was living, I think, in Bossburg in a trailer at the time, if I remember right.
Yeah, okay.
I could be incorrect about that, but that's what I remember.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. As far as evidence goes, has anything been that you're aware of, or have anything been accumulated beyond, tracks, hairs, anything definitive?
Well, definitive is a real strong word for what we're doing. Yeah. There's been no corpse. There's been no bones.
There's been no corpse.
Yeah, no, nothing like that. People have shot and killed him, but they didn't bring him in for a variety of reasons. Yeah. The body of evidence now basically stands with, okay, there's some unknown hair samples that are internally congruent but don't match anything else in North America, and they are primate hairs. We have that.
Okay, so they know that. So that they've been found out here in, say, in the Pacific Northwest, and they can say that they're primate hairs.
Yes, yeah, because primate hairs have a certain characteristics. For example, primate hairs don't taper, don't have a real strong taper.
Yeah.
They're actually more or less parallel. There's a slight taper, but more or less parallel to the end, and then it's a blunt end. Not a cut end, but a blunt end.
Yeah.
And that's one of the characteristics of primate hair, and we have those. And we have several samples that are internally congruent. They lack a medulla, which is the center core of the hair. It's like a pencil lead inside of a pencil. It's like a hollow shaft. They either have fragmentary or missing medullas. They're reddish when backlit. So there's a number of characters, and they're about 65 or so microns across on average. So these characteristics are all of these hairs, again, like that, match each other. But so we have hairs. We have plenty of footprint casts, but 300 or 400 footprint casts. There's a smattering of handprints as well, which are super interesting. That's one of the there's a couple butt prints and some knee prints as well. There's some face smudges on glass, that sort of stuff. There's a lot of spoor, but no proof.
Yeah, well, I didn't know that we actually had some primate hairs up here.
Oh yeah, we've got them on display in the museum.
Oh man, okay, I got to get up on current events. Yeah. Well, tell us about how does the DNA thing work? Because I think there's some confusion on that. Is it the same?
Well, the DNA, of course, is the building blocks of life. It's the genetic blueprint for your body making itself, because our body makes itself from inside out, kind of. Like our skin regenerates and makes more skin, and the DNA tells various cells how to do that. And so, it's coded, of course, and you can track animals by species that way and stuff. And DNA has been a big push, but it's not going to solve this whole thing. Of course, it's going to push the ball a little bit further down the field, but it's not going to solve anything, because even though other species have been identified and discovered by DNA, like the Homo denisovans, for example, is a wonderful example, because they are a hominin. They are maybe not an ancestor, but a close relative of human beings, and they lived contemporarily with Neanderthals and whatever else, and even Homo sapiens as well, from what I understand. Though that species was discovered through DNA. I believe it was in Russia or northern China. They found a phalange, a segment of a finger, one finger bone, and they thought it was Neanderthal. Yeah. So they did a DNA test on it, and lo and behold, it wasn't Neanderthal, because we've sequenced Neanderthal DNA now. It was something different, and it turns out it was Denisovans. And now, that was the first hint that these things existed at all. And now they've done other DNA tests. For example, there's a jaw, a mandible, sitting in a museum, I believe, somewhere, discovered in 84, 88, or something like that. They DNA tested that. Turns out that was Denisovan as well. We've had Denisovans since 1980s. We just didn't know it at the time. We misidentified the fossil. And they've even gone into caves in Russia and tested the dirt in caves for eDNA, environmental DNA. And they found Neanderthal and Homo denisovan DNA in the dirt itself inside caves, even though those caves had no visible remnants of Neanderthals living there, like fire pits or, ancient graffiti or whatever.
So, environmental DNA, what does that mean exactly?
Basically, you test the environment in which something may or may not be living. Like, say, for example, you have a pond, and you wanted to know if some sort of invasive fish species has gotten into that pond. What you can do is take several samples of the water and do eDNA testing on it, and it'll tell you and it'll tell you all the species that live in your pond. And so what you do is you use certain primers. Primers in DNA amplify certain kinds of DNA, because there might just be a trace of DNA in there, but if you amplify them with the primer, you're amplifying that particular kind of DNA to such a level where you can test it effectively. And what you can do is use primate or human or something like that primers and amplify that kind of DNA.
If I recall, wasn't there one of these shows had a big thing on eDNA? They thought they found some primate eDNA. Was it Kentucky or?
I think Nat Geo did something where they tested some sort of Yeti print in the snow and got something. But if it's on TV, I don't bother listening to it, because I just assume it's not true.
Wait,
because I don't get my science from TV, and no one should.
Okay.
People should get their science from journal articles and books.
Right.
If there's anything there, it's going to be published, because that will make somebody's career.
Yeah.
No one's going to leave that one alone if it's true. And I never saw it, and I can't really speak to it.
Okay.
But I know that if it's real, it will eventually be published in some sort of scientific journal article after being peer reviewed, and that's when I start paying attention.
Because when I heard that, I didn't really know what you had to explain it to me. I didn't really look up Google what is eDNA, whatever. But
you're testing the environment for whatever kind of DNA might be there. So.
Okay. So The other thing I was going to ask you, given your experience and stuff like that, is, do you think a Bigfoot could be captured alive?
Well, I suppose it's possible, but extraordinarily unlikely. It's so unlikely that I think it's whatever the step right before impossible would be.
Yeah.
Because they're real smart. They're not humans or anything. They're not using fire, using calculators or whatever. But they're they're pretty smart, way smarter than bears and chimps, probably a brown chimpanzee or greater intelligence. And then they have hands, and they weigh 1,200 pounds. So the only effective way to really do that would be some sort of tranquilizer. But the thing is, tranquilizers are usually like ketamine or some sort of PCP or something like that, heavily controlled drugs, basically, and you need a prescription for that.
Yeah.
And if you go to a wildlife veterinarian and say, I need this much ketamine, please, I'm going to go tranquilize a Sasquatch, that veterinarian is going to say, you've already had enough.
Yeah. No, I know. Dude, that's funny because when I was putting together all the people I thought I needed for our first trip into Port Chatham, Alaska, I mean, we were like, we were going to get one. You know what I'm saying? So I was searching around to find a veterinarian guy, whatever, because you had to be certified or whatever.
Yeah.
I had him on call. If we did run anything, we were going to fly him out there to tranquilize the Nantidoc forest and all that. But it was kind of interesting because it's like, well, you just can't get the stuff. And if you don't know how to use it, is it going to work? But we did find somebody that, if need be, for a certain amount of money, was going to be kind of like on call during the time that we were out there. But unfortunately, the only person that probably needed to be tranquilized out there was me. But anyways.
Well, and also tranquilizer guns are wildly inaccurate, and it'd be very close range to get them anything done. Krantz goes over all this in his book, of course, Dr. Grover Krantz. His point is one clean shot with a bullet will do the same thing, and the animal won't suffer, and it'll be dead, but it won't suffer, because if you give it too much ketamine, you don't want that. You don't want a 1,200-pound primate tripping, and scared and all that other stuff. And you give it too little, it's just going to be pissed off. You give it too much, it's going to kill it. A bullet will do the same thing. And I don't advocate for that necessarily, but I also am not naive enough to think that there's another way around it. A dead one will be necessary. Now, I'm not carrying a gun, I'm not carrying a rifle, but those are the facts.
Right.
I didn't write the rules, but those are the rules.
I appreciate you saying that, because I agree with you on that. That's where we're at.
But having said that, even shooting one of these things isn't going to be easy. A friend of mine knows someone who was a police officer, and he was brought in because a male silverback gorilla got out of a zoo and was rampaging and putting people and itself in danger, and they had to put the animal down. So I'm not a gun guy. I've got a couple firearms, but I'm not a gun guy, and I know that because I know gun guys, and I'm not one of them, right?
Yeah.
But numbers and this and that calibers and stuff, it's not my thing. But they had something like a 450. Some Bushmaster or something like that. I don't know. My gun guys listening, you'll know, but I don't know. But it's some big grizzly or polar bear gun or something like that. And this guy had to shoot the silverback gorilla 5 times to bring it down. And the 5th time, the reason it brought it down the 5th time is that it severed the spine. Otherwise, it would have kept rampaging. But the thing about it is that there were 0 exit wounds in the body. And we'd have to assume that Sasquatch would be just as thickly packed as one of these things. It would be an extraordinarily dangerous thing to do, to try to bring one of these things down with any gun. Okay,
well, because people ask me, what's your preferred firearm when you go out? And I go 458 Winchester Magnum, which is a elephant gun. I mean, whatever, basically. But after what you said, this guy had a similar caliber thing, and it's not going to work. So I'm not going to be confident about
Shoot
that.
well and reload. Yeah,
Yeah.
Because depending on how dangerous or how smart or vindictive these animals are, you may not get out alive. But at the same time, I've heard other stories of people shooting at these things, and they're pretty sure they hit it, and they didn't do anything in return.
I've read a few stories, don't know if they're true. I mean, like this one guy is out deer hunting, and he shoots a deer, and before he gets to it, a Sasquatch comes out of the bushes, trees, grabs the deer, throws it over his shoulders, and starts walking away with it. And according to the story I read, this guy shot the Bigfoot right in the back, which I think is rude. And he said he heard it impact, and it didn't even phase it.
Yeah.
Didn't even phase it. It just kept on going down the road.
They're extraordinarily large, strong animals, thickly packed with muscle and just ripped. All the witnesses I speak to, they don't say, oh, it looked like I've been watching TV and hanging out and eating Cheetos. It's like, no, it was ripped, just ripped. It's astonishingly strong.
So anyways, if you gun enthusiasts think that's going to work, this is a story to kind of
good luck and reload quick is all I got to say. Yeah, but get it done. If you're going to do it, get it done one time only, and let's get past the mystery part of this.
Yeah, yeah. Well, I have to ask you this question. You probably had it asked 100 times, but it's the number one question that I get from people is they ask, why hasn't a body been found?
Oh, same reason we don't find bear bones. Basically, people say Sasquatches are real. Where are their bones? So, okay, well, bears are real. Where are their bones? We don't find them. Is a fact.
Yeah.
Start asking, and a lot of people don't believe me, but I challenge them. Start asking rangers, wildlife biologists, owl hooters, loggers, whatever, people who live and work out in the brush. You're going to find that they're almost never, ever, ever found.
Yeah.
And it's because when an animal dies, they don't know they're going to die. Usually, they think they're sick. And what do we do when we're sick? We hold ourselves up in bed, right? So animals, they know they're vulnerable when they're sick or dying or whatever, so they put themselves somewhere that's going to be safe for them because they're vulnerable. And so they literally started out by hiding their body. And then one day, instead of getting better like they had every other time in their life, they die. So their bodies are now hidden. And within a few hours to a few days at most, scavengers start moving in. Things like coyotes and weasels and whatever else. And so the body parts are going to be dispersed. Like a leg will go that way, an arm will go that way, its finger, that sort of thing. And to be spread out in this thickly wooded area that the animal probably is holding up in. The meat will be quickly eaten away. The hair is eaten by moths. And then the bones are eaten by the most plentiful animal in North America, the deer mouse. Deer mice eat bones, as do wood rats and porcupines.
I did
and
not know
coyotes.
that.
Yeah, coyotes eat bones. Deer and elk eat bones. We have a couple wonderful photographs in the NABC, the museum, of elk with bones out of their mouth because they're getting the calcium from those bones. On YouTube, there's a wonderful a wonderful little snippet on YouTube taken at one of these body farms that we have through the South. A body farm is a forensic lab where you can leave your body to science after you die.
Okay.
And then one of the places it could go are one of these body farms where they leave your corpse out in a variety of conditions and document how it decomposes over time. And that helps forensic scientists solve crimes and do that sort of stuff. And there's a wonderful trail camera video of a deer standing over a human corpse eating the bones away on YouTube. Look it up. It's fantastic. So the bones are literally eaten. And so the short answer is that the forest recycles it. But you also have to take into consideration the rarity of the species. At best guess from people who know far more about ecology than I do, we think it's safe that there's 100, maybe 1 to 200 bears for every one Sasquatch out there. They're just very rare animals. And that's based on footprint evidence and not gut feelings, because gut feelings from people say, oh, Bigfoots are plentiful. I run into them every time I go out. Yeah. No, you're fooling yourself. That's not actually true, which is cute. It's great, but they're very rare animals, So in my state of Oregon, there's about 30 to 35,000 black bear. Okay, and to use those numbers, that means there's maybe 300 or so Bigfoots. And if they live 50, 60 years, that means 5 or 6 of these things are dying a year. 5 or 6 are dying a year somewhere in the state of Oregon, if they live as long as we think they do. Yeah. And consider that with bears. There's 500 or 600, or actually it's more than that because bears don't live as long. A lot more bears are dying, and we don't find bear bones. We should not expect to find Sasquatch bones, although it is the most preferred way to discover the species.
People ask me this too, and I don't really have an answer for them. Nationally, like in the U.S., how many Sasquatch, what do you... have you any idea what the general population?
Well, that's a hard one too, because the way you frame the question, because Sasquatches don't respect boundaries. They are the ultimate anarchists. They don't give a darn about the United States or Canada. So you can't say United States because they don't think of it like that. Yeah. But why don't we say North America? I think a safe, conservative guess is somewhere between 5,000 and 10,000 Sasquatches in North America. Okay. There might be more of them because Canada is largely unoccupied, and most Canadians live by the border, essentially the border and the coast. But there's a whole lot of interior land that nobody really goes to so much. Yeah. And the indigenous people all throughout Canada have stories of Sasquatches, so they seem to be rather widespread in a suitable habitat, and actually outside of habitat that we would think is suitable for them as well. That was one of my big takeaways from being on the road with the show Animal Planet's Finding Bigfoot for so long, is that Sasquatches don't give a darn about our expectations. Yeah. They go where they want to go, and we have to deal with that.
That leads to another question. When you brought up like Native American or First Nations and stuff, what is the number one, or what origin stories for Sasquatch. What have you heard from them about? What's your origin story? Where'd Sasquatch come from?
Now I'm not privy to the native knowledge as far as native traditions as far as the origin stories of Sasquatches. I mean, I know that. Well, there's one tribe, the Thule, on the Thule Indian Reservation in the southern Sierra Nevada mountains. I don't know about the origins of Sasquatches, but the origins of humans are from Sasquatches, according to their tradition. And they
humans are from Sasquatch.
Yeah. On the Thule Indian Reservation in southern Sierra Nevada mountains in California, it's a place called Painted Rock, and they call it that because of the hairy man pictographs. And there's life-size hairy man drawings on the wall there, and basically the story goes, there's a big hairy man, it's 8.5 feet tall, it's life-size. There's a female and then a young on the same panel, and there's humans in the panel and other animals and beavers and everything else that you would expect to see, but that's hairy man. It's 8.5 feet tall, and it's way different than the humans that are depicted there as well. Well, the hairy man was put there because these particular native people, their tradition is that human beings were born of hairy man. The very short condensed version of the story is that hairy man and coyote were arguing about how to create the other animals. Coyote was saying they should walk on 4 legs like me, and hairy man was saying no, they should walk on 2 legs like me. And so to solve the dispute, they decided to have a running race. Now, coyote, if you know anything about indigenous traditions, so coyote is always a trickster. He's up to something. He's lying. He's cheating. He's doing something. And sure enough, they make the race. They do the race, and Coyote cheats and he wins. And that's why all the animals walk on 4 legs. And of course, hairy man, being the smartest of the animals, which shows us a little bit about their intelligence level and the native traditions and knowledge about the species in general, figures out that Coyote cheated right away. Yeah. And he started crying because he was cheated. And human beings sprang from the tears of hairy man. And that's why we walk on 2 legs. So as far as creation stories go, that's the only indigenous group that we know of that actually has Sasquatches as part of their creation story, and I think it's kind of special.
That's interesting. I'm going to have to read more on that, because the little racing, that's kind of good. The number one thing that I have heard is that Sasquatch are basically feral humans. What do you think about that?
Oh, they're not humans at all.
Not humans?
No.
Okay.
I mean, they're not. They might be in our genus at best, but they're not Homo sapiens by any stretch of the imagination. Never met a Homo sapien 8.5 feet tall with weird feet that bend in places that ours doesn't, and a weird thumb position, and just they're not humans. I don't see anything human about them.
Okay.
Yeah, humans have a tradition of stuff. They don't have stuff. They don't carry things. I mean, they've been seen carrying sticks and logs, but that's a little bit different than a locket with mom's picture in it. So yeah, they're not human in any reasonable way. They might be Homo. They might be in our genus. But even that's kind of a stretch at this point. And they're smart, they're human-like, just like chimpanzees are human-like, and humans are chimpanzee-like as well. So we that is our family, that is our biological group, and we have a lot of commonalities between us and the other great apes. Now, Sasquatches are, in my opinion, are probably more closely related to us than chimpanzees are. Yeah. I personally think that they're hominins. I think that there's not real strong evidence, but there's some strong indicators that they're probably hominins, which is a fancy word that means off of the chain, off of our evolutionary track, between now, when we're fully Homo sapiens, and when we split from chimpanzees about 6 or 8 million years ago. Anything in between there is called a hominin.
Okay.
So Homo ergaster, Homo erectus, Homo sapiens, Neanderthals, Australopithecines, all of these are hominins, and I think that Sasquatch is.
What is the Gigantopithecus?
Well, the Gigantopithecus is not a hominin. Actually, it's a parallel thing from an Asian ape line. Recent, I think it's called proteonics study, where they got proteins out of the teeth. Because Gigantopithecus is represented by about 5 or 6 mandibles and a few hundred teeth, and that's all we've really got at this point. A couple different subspecies, that sort of thing. And they got proteins. They got ancient proteins out of the teeth, and then did some testing on the proteins to find the lineage. And what they found is that Gigantopithecus is squarely in the lineage between Shivapithecus and orangutans. So on that line somewhere. Now that's not a hominin. That's a pongid. So it's a different train. It's a different line of lineage, and they might be Gigantopithecines. I don't think so. It's possible. That's on the table, but I lean towards another possible ancestor species.
Yeah.
Because we know so little about Gigantopithecines.
Well, yeah, and that's the one that I hear the most.
Oh, yeah, of course.
And I've read some things, and people are speaking definitively, and it's like, well, this is
it's pretty strong to speak definitively.
Yeah.
Because we know almost nothing about Gigantopithecus.
Yeah.
All we have are teeth and jawbones, and you can only learn so much. We don't even know if they were upright or not. We don't know anything else about them. That question is still on the table. Were they even upright? We don't know. They were the right size, at the right place, at the right time. And those three things is a strong argument, but it's not enough. And I think it's definitely a good candidate, but I think a better candidate would be the robust Australopithecines. I think that Paranthropus is probably the strongest one. Well, because the Australopithecines are hominins. They're one of the earliest hominins. And when I look at Sasquatch behavior, and I've literally spoken to thousands and thousands of people who have seen these things, no exaggeration at all, on the road and all my emails and people in the museum and stuff. What is missing from their behavior is using and controlling fire and a strong history of tool use. Okay, they certainly use tools. I've gotten reports of them breaking clamshells with rocks, but sea otters do that. So is that really all that spectacular? Not really. No, crows use tools. Chimpanzees use tools. So tool use isn't one, and their use of tools seems to fall into that same general mode as chimpanzees and crows and all that other stuff and sea otters. So without fire and without tool use and fashioning and using tools, you have to, in my opinion, those would be two adaptations that would be very difficult to get rid of once you have them because they're so useful for such a variety of things. You probably wouldn't get rid of that once you discovered those things. So in my opinion, I think we have to look before the first hominin, the first human ancestor that used those things on a regular basis, which is Homo habilis. Now, if you look at anywhere before Homo habilis, we're looking at the Australopithecines. Australopithecines are small, chimpanzee brain-sized bipedal apes. And there were two flavors of them, a thin one, which we think later rose to our species, like through millions of years of evolution, and a thicker one, which were basically thick, robust, gnarly ones, which were basically Sasquatches if Sasquatches were 5 feet tall.
Yeah, that made me think of what's Sumatra, the orang pendek or something.
What about the orang pendek?
Isn't that a short?
The orang pendek is another species. I think it's much more ape-like, and I sponsored a project for a few years with locals in Sumatra to try to gather physical evidence of the orang pendek. And it turns out that many of the footprint casts that came to it, I deem as fake, because some of the local people who are working with it, I found out, unbeknownst to me, and I did not give permission to this, started paying witnesses. So we got a lot of fake stories. But the early casts and some of the later casts, I think, are actually real. And if those casts are in fact real, we're not looking at one of these things. We're looking at something more akin to like a terrestrial orangutan, which we know also existed in Southeast Asia not that long ago. But with the recent discovery of Homo floresiensis on the island of Flores, that's another possibility as well. And to this day, there are still sightings of small hairy hominoids on the island of Flores, both in eastern Indonesia. It's one of the islands in Indonesia. And in the western part of Flores, they see these things that they describe as ibu gogo, which are supposedly extinct, and the Najis people say that they killed the last ones 200 years ago or so, not that long ago, by smoking them out in a cave, which is also an interesting motif that we hear throughout the United States and indigenous people as well. But in the eastern part of Flores, there are still sightings of these small hairy hominoids today, and a wonderful anthropologist named Dr. Gregory Forth just published his second book. He's a cultural anthropologist with an emphasis on the people of Flores, and he's collected enough stories of people he personally knows that he says that, these things are still here. Homo floresiensis are very likely still here, or at least their ancestors are still here, because these people I know are saying they see these things. And it's a fascinating book, and it's just published in 2022.
So much. I mean, there's so much that you could delve into. Where do you start? It's like I can barely stay on track with what's going on here in the Pacific Northwest.
There's a lot going on everywhere.
Other stuff. Man, I got to ask you this one too. A lot of people will say, and they'll say to the question, well, why don't we got any Bigfoot bones, or why haven't we found them? And then you got the guy that says, well, because the government came in and took them. And
government conspiracy people have a lot more faith in the government than I do. They can't even balance a budget. They can't even be civil to one another or shake each other's hands. There's no compromise in today's government. It's like a religion, and just as dogmatic. I personally don't think the government's capable of keeping a lid on this sort of thing. So I don't think there's anything there. I know rumor has it that a couple of Congress and Senate people have actually seen these things.
Yeah.
I've got that. Some people in Kentucky, some representatives from Kentucky apparently have seen these things. And I've got it from several sources, by the way. Not just one person said that that's true. Apparently a couple people have heard these guys talk about it. So if they already know about it, the question is, why aren't they interested? And the real reason is because they can't line their pockets with it. There's no money in it for them, frankly, is what it comes down to.
I love your cynicism.
Well, I mean, it's just the way it is. Like, why would they care? What does that have to do with, keeping the economy going and making their donors happy? Nothing.
Yeah.
And the damage would be if they were discovered, of course, then we'd have another situation like the snail darter fish or the spotted owl, where certain industries take a little bit of a hit for a while, like the logging industry. Well, the logging industry is still kind of limping along after the spotted owl deal in the 90s, even now, because they've revised the way you log. It's a little bit more sustainable now and all that sort of stuff, But with Sasquatches, remember, the politicians, they're not interested in much besides money. That's their God, right? They everything they do kind of feeds the economy. That's what they worship. It says, "In God we trust," right on the dollar bill, right? And then I think the politicians adhere to that. So what's the best way to serve their master, their dollar bill master? Yeah. Don't do anything, because Sasquatches are doing a really good job taking care of themselves for totally free. They're a free workforce. You don't have to pay them a dime. There's no money involved at all, et cetera. And on top of it, the people who believe that Sasquatches are paranormal in nature or interdimensional, UFO riding, shape-shifting, something or others, they're doing a really good job discrediting the subject in the eyes of scientists. Yeah. No one's bothering to look into it.
That's my point as well. And I've actually said that before, so I'm going to give myself a pat on the back.
Yeah, if there's a conspiracy, it's an unspoken one, because they don't have to do a thing about Sasquatches.
One of the things that I had asked some previous guests and whatnot, when I look at it, where you had where Bigfoot research started, and the major players that back in the 70s or 60s or whatever, and then as it's gone along, it's turned into, in my opinion, just a real big mess with all these different varying thoughts of where Bigfoot comes from. But what I think, that's what I think, is that there is a trend going from, a physical creature, a great ape, those kind of things, to all of these mystical, magical kind of things popping out of trees and portals and stuff like that. And it seems like they're, that woo stuff. It seems that woo stuff seems to be growing and growing and growing, and people are getting away from the basics. Is that making?
Sure.
Make any sense? Because that drives me nuts.
I know several investigators who older than I am, and they were on the flesh and blood thing for quite a while, and then they decided, well, that I would have gotten somewhere by now. Well, therefore, they must be something spiritual or paranormal or something. And I think that's a cop-out. I think that's underestimating them. Sasquatches aren't easier to find one day than the next. Yeah. They're always difficult to find. You have to go a lot and get lucky. But I think that's just kind of a cop-out. Where I would have known by now because I'm that good. Yeah. No. Don't overestimate yourself.
Yeah, I've heard that said before, so they must be this because I haven't found them yet. But, I was naive as hell when I first jumped into this full force.
Everyone is.
In June of 2017. And I thought, I know what I'm going to do. I'm going to go back up to BC where I had my first encounter and where I know there's some other encounters going on. I'm going to bag this thing within 6 months. And I'm foolish, man. I've been running all over the place, in that area, to Alaska or wherever these hot spots are, where I think, and here we are almost 6 years later, 5 years later, right?
The best hot spot is the one closest to your house.
And I'm learning that. I'm learning a lot from you because that is true. I think so.
Yeah, I love Bluff Creek, man, but it's a 7-8 hour drive for me. I'm not going to go down there all the time. Yeah. I go there for historical reasons. For Bigfooting, I go 45 minutes from my house or an hour and a half the other direction. That's it.
See, I envy you.
You got them here.
Yeah.
Yeah, you just have to pay attention to where the sighting clusters are.
We've been spending a lot of time up north here and whatnot. I'd like to be a little bit closer. I'd like to be able to just live right out there with them, out in the specific country, because I some of the people that I've interviewed up there, they live right in the area where all this stuff is happening, and they have frequent sightings on their properties, different times of the year and things like that, which I envy them, which is kind of cool. But
yeah, you envy them now until one gets mad at you for something.
Yeah.
Because it's one thing, people always careful what you ask for. I know
Yeah.
people who live with Sasquatches on the property. They probably get visuals every couple of years, or they bangs on the outside of their house. Things are moved around.
Yeah.
And then they're scary, man. No matter how ready you think you are to see a Sasquatch, at the end of the day, they're scary.
Yeah, I mean, it changes your whole view. I mean, you've got some 8-foot tall, hairy creature running around out there that's physically intimidating, and I think one of the things that makes them so frightening is not only their sizes, but they look like potentially half human or whatever.
Yeah, they look like monsters. We've been trained that's what the monsters look like.
Because it's scary, and you have nightmares, and then you watch stuff like Boggy Creek, and then you have more nightmares. But wow, is there anything on your mind? I've asked you a lot, and I appreciate you sharing everything that you have. Is there anything that you would love to say to the folks, or as far as something significant, or just?
I don't know. I think for the most part, for Bigfooters who are listening, make sure you're doing it for the right reasons. I mean, you can do it for the wrong reasons if you want, but you'll learn eventually. The best reasons, I think, to do this sort of thing is that you enjoy it. It seems to me that most of the community is kind of doing it for ego reasons. They want to be the one to do this or that, or they want to be the one to film it, or they want to be the one to show other people something or whatever. And that's always about them. I try to keep the focus on the animals and what can be learned from them, about them and from them. That's my particular focus, but I've been at it a long time, and I've gone through all sorts of stages. I had my ego stage as well. And we all do it because I'm an older man now. And we just have to, kind of move through those and mature. And at this point, I'm pretty comfortable with where I am. I'm not going to prove it. And I know I'm not going to prove the animals are real because I'm not going to shoot one. I'm just not that kind of guy. It's just I'm not interested in trying to kill one of these things. And it sounds horrifying to me. I'd love to film one. I think that there's other things to learn from them by filming them and getting more than a data set of one. The Patterson-Gimlin film is the best film we have, and it's a wonderful film. You see the muscle movements, and it's just fantastic. And the footprints that go with it. I'd love to get something else like that, whether I film it or if I can assist somebody else in filming, it would be fine. I think there's more to learn about them physically by doing that, and maybe place them a little bit closer to us or further from us on the family tree, so to speak. But right now, I'm interested in learning about them. My focus is on them and what they do, how they survive, where they go, why they go there, all that sort of stuff. And footprint casts, of course, are a huge focus of mine as well. I've even been told that, I don't do footprint casts because what are we going to learn by getting another one? So we don't know. We don't know until we get it. I agree with you on
that too, because after you get a couple, I mean, there's hundreds of them. You've got, whatever. It's like after a while, how many do I want to have?
Yeah,
because it's just
as many as possible. Because the larger the data set, the more true your numbers are going to be. If you have 12 footprint casts, you don't know very much about Sasquatch feet. Is my thought. Yeah. If you have to have a few dozen of these things to really start getting a handle on the flexibility in their feet, what various footprints could look like from the same individual animal.
That was a question I was going to ask you. So, now, have you identified something from that?
Oh, yeah, of course. Yeah.
Could you talk just a little bit about that?
Yeah, and there aren't very many people doing it either.
No, they're not.
No, Dr. Meldreman does it. I do this. Tom Shea does it out in Kentucky. But that's kind of about it. I don't know anybody else who's doing the kind of work that I think is important, which is tracking the individual Sasquatches over time. Yeah. And it turns out that it's very doable in the same sort of way that orca and great white shark researchers can identify individual great white sharks by the shape of their dorsal fin and certain marks on it and whatever else, and orcas have certain markings. They can trace individuals, and that gives us really good estimates on their population numbers and range and all that sort of stuff. We can do the same thing with Sasquatch feet. The casts, it turns out that the hallux, the big toe, is actually a pretty strong indicator of the individual Sasquatch, or closely related Sasquatches. We're not really sure which one. So the footprint casts are really the only way to do this at this point. In fact, but that's okay because most wildlife biologists study mammals, whether we're talking bears, wolverines, or marmots or whatever, but not by visually observing the animals. No, they track them. They find their spoor, their foraging sites, their tracks, their dens, that sort of stuff. And that's how we learn about the life habits, the natural history of these other mammals, because most mammals are very, very shy and reclusive, and they're mostly nocturnal, and they don't want anything to do with us, and they hear us coming and leave before we get there, just like Sasquatches. Nothing abnormal about that at all. And so by tracking Sasquatches and casting their footprints, we're now starting to get a handle on territory range, on social structure, on diet, on foraging habits, and not migration routes. That kind of gives a different image, but where they go at certain times of years and perhaps or why. Yeah, it's a fascinating subject. It's a fascinating field of study within Sasquatch. So.
How do you find out about diet by their foot? By where you're finding the footprints, or?
Well, for example, I did a follow-up report on the Olympic Peninsula 3 years ago. A friend of mine, Lori, she calls me, and she's a wonderful investigator up there, casts a bunch of prints in this one particular area. And one of the local native people, I think he was Skokomish, but I could be wrong about that. He was parked by a river, and he saw two Sasquatches run down the hill, cross the road, and went out into the field, into the brush, and then one of them, I guess, circled back around and scared the hell out of him from the other side of the from the other side of the river right there. And he bailed. He just left or whatever. Yeah. And then Lori got a hold of this. My friend Lori Jo Hamilton, wonderful researcher, very, very smart lady, great friend. She got a hold of it, and she told me about it. I was up there a couple of days later because I had a couple of days off, and I figured, here we go. And so I went up there with my friend Shane Corson from the Olympic Project. Shane's another solid researcher, great guy. And we went up there with Lori, and said, this is where it happened. And then, and so Shane and I looked around on the hillside, didn't find anything. Then Shane and I crossed the river out and went out in the field. And Lori did not, by the way. Lori stayed on the other side because she can't swim and she's afraid of water, and that's significant because when we're out in the field, we found footprints. I found a footprint, and I would have it stepped in a pile of bear dung. It was the only way that only way that left a print in the grass. But the footprint was like, say, where you are, but where I am, there was a big log that had been lifted up and moved aside, just a matter of a day or a few days before, around the same time that as the animals were seen by this native gentleman. Okay. And so that tells us a little bit about a foraging habit, about the animal. What was it doing? What was it looking for under the log?
Right.
Well, under the log, even a few days later, I could see a bunch of green sprouts coming up. And the fresh green sprouts are always high in nutritional value. That's why the deer and everything else eat them. But what else could have been underneath there? How about some grubs? How about some rodents? Those are the sort of things that we can learn by studying the foraging habits and the tracks. Remember, there's a track associated with this. I didn't just find a log that was moved. I found a footprint 8 feet away from this log. That's the sort of thing we can learn by studying this sort of behavior.
Yeah, because I look for correlate. I mean, if I find a track, I look for something else around it, or if I find, try to look for something other than just one thing. Like to find multiple things with it. It's like a lot of people talk about tree structures, and a lot of people just go insane over tree structures. Everything's a tree structure, whatever. But when I'm out, if I find something that somebody says, I want you to go look at this, I found this weird tree structure, the first thing I'm gonna do is I'm gonna look in an area all the way around it to see if I can find any track evidence or something else that goes with this other than just a weird thing. Because I don't put a lot of faith in the tree structure thing.
No, I don't either.
Because nobody's ever provided me with a tree structure, and I found these tracks
right next to it. Right. Yeah, and I'm going to go on top of that one more. Again, I've literally spoken to thousands of eyewitnesses. Yeah. No exaggeration. Yeah. Not one time has anyone ever told me that they saw the Sasquatch making these structures. Never once. But yet, you think of every other purported behavior of Sasquatches: tree knocking, rock clacking, deer killing, rock throwing. All those are available in eyewitness reports.
Oh, I'm glad you said that, because that's one thing I was going to ask you too, because I've had a really big, I'm very skeptical, or was until now, of this tree knocking thing, because I've never seen it. I've been out, when I've been out, I've heard, a branch fall down and, hit another one that would sound similar, but particularly last summer when I was up north, where the pine cones were green and they were falling off the trees, man, they were sounding almost like a gunshot, when they hit the ground, and I thought, that could be what I'm hearing. I don't know.
Yeah, it's harder to explain when you get responses right back. Yeah. And on top of that, when they imitate the pattern you just did, that's awful hard to explain as well, like by a tree, by things falling from trees. And there are also sighting reports of them doing it.
Okay.
I have 2 sighting reports of them actually hitting a tree with a stick, but I have 3 reports of them clapping. Which is really interesting because gorillas are known to clap for making these big popping noises. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. There was a wonderful study in Rwanda about 6 or 8 years ago. It's hard for me to say because I got a pretty elastic sense of time. But about 6 or 8 years ago, there was it was actually in the regular news, right? Yeah. My news feed about Rwandan researchers going into these swamps in lowland Rwanda somewhere, and these gorillas, these lowland gorillas, were the females would clap upon the entrance of the researchers to warn the other gorillas that they were there. And many times when I've been out in the woods in purported Sasquatch areas, when I arrive, I hear a big, solid, loud tree knock. And another habit is that when somebody in the party leaves and I stay behind quietly, oftentimes after they leave, there's another tree knock. Really? And so I think that it's a very strong possibility that these things are just doing the same behaviors as the gorillas. It's nothing new. Yeah. And if they're the palm of their hands, even are that big or more. Yeah. And I used to hang out with these Brazilian people a lot, and the Brazilians are a very musical culture. If there's a song on, they're probably either dancing, singing along, or clapping, along with it. They're just a wonderful, vibrant, beautiful culture in that sort of way. At least these people I hung out with, they're all musicians and capoeiristas and stuff like that. But and they would clap somehow extraordinarily loud. And they just had human-sized hands. I shudder to think if you had a big palm like this and nothing better to do for every single day of your life out in the woods but to practice, you'd probably get some really loud popping noises going with your hands.
Yeah. Because, anyways, I thank you for sharing that because I had no idea because I'd never heard that there had been any eyewitnesses that had said that they'd actually seen them do it. Yeah. So I'll have to change my opinion on that. Okay, you already said you don't. I was going to ask you. You answered that question. You don't
Sorry,
really watch.
I get ahead of myself. So
well, I think you'd answer that. You don't really watch any shows.
No, no, I don't watch any Bigfoot TV shows, especially. Okay. No.
And just because you don't think there's much to garner from those, other than
not really,
other than entertainment.
Yeah, it's all for fun. It's all for fun.
Yeah.
And for and I was on TV for a long time, and it was a struggle to keep it as real as possible, especially that first season. After that, we got it down. We made sure that our producers were on board with us, et cetera. Yeah. We had the blessing of the network. We weren't asked to lie. First season, we were kind of asked to stretch some truths, and we weren't willing to do so. And then eventually, we're edited to make it look like we saw Bigfoots, and we didn't. Like the horse in Florida, for example, first season. Yeah. And we threw a big fit. And the Animal Planet stepped in and said, no, we don't want this. We want you guys to do your real thing. Yeah. And the production company was kind of putting aside. It's like, hey, no more of that. No more of that. These guys are, and basically they were saying, these guys are weird enough. Just follow them around with the camera. They're going to make good TV. It's essentially what it is. Right. And so we never lied on camera. It was about Bigfoot stuff. Yeah, I'll be the first one to admit, we didn't have to take a speedboat to get anywhere. That's TV. I taught 10-year-olds for a living. I taught 5th graders for a living. So I understand a good hook, a good story hook. Right. And there's nothing wrong with that. TV is supposed to be fun. Yeah. But for us, the Bigfooting part was deadly serious. We were going Bigfooting on somebody else's dime, and we're going to squeeze every last drop out of that we could. And so if we said it, on TV, if we said it about a Bigfoot thing, what we heard, what we saw, what we think about a piece of evidence or something, we might be incorrect, but we never lied. And that's one of the neat things. And I'm not saying that the people on the TV shows are liars or anything like that, but a lot can happen between the time somebody says something and when it airs on TV, thanks to the editors and production companies. And I just don't trust any of that anymore. I can't even watch regular TV shows that have nothing to do with Bigfoot because I see right through the production. Yeah. It just seems all fake to me, so I don't watch it. And
I agree with you on that because I will tell you, we've got like 4 films in the can, done. But here's the thing, nothing happened.
Yeah, that's Bigfooting.
Yeah,
right.
Nothing happened, and it's like, and you are tempted to, interject something or whatnot, but we just don't do it. Yeah, and it's sad, but you don't know what's going to happen.
But you have the luxury of doing that because you're self-funded and you're just releasing individual things. Serial programs that you have to have one out every week, no matter what, and there's $300,000 or $400,000 per episode on the line. You've got to do something. Yeah, and the pressure on these production companies to produce sensational stories and compete with the other other nonsense shows that are out there. It must be extraordinary. And I just don't want to be any part of it because I figure, and I know the people, I know most of the people on all the shows, and they're good people, and they're honest, and they're doing the best they can with it and stuff. And it's not a slight to them in any manner. It's a slight to what I'm trying to point out is that I don't trust the entertainment industry. Because their job is entertainment. They don't give a darn about Bigfoots. And I care tremendously about Sasquatches and the subject, but they don't. And they're going to do what they need to do to make their particular bosses happy. And I can't blame them for that because they don't have a dog in this fight.
Yeah.
But I do. And I just don't want to see the subject that I find so lovely and endearing trashed and thrown under the bus because it does a disservice to not only the research and the researchers, but in my opinion, the animals themselves.
Yeah, I agree.
So I don't watch TV. I don't watch Bigfoot TV.
Yeah, so I don't. But in the time that you've been here, it's made me it's compelling me to go back and watch some stuff that I haven't seen before. Just because I haven't for a while, and there seems to be some other films and stuff like that are out there just to see what's going on.
You know what? At the NABC, the museum, we have a membership program, and part of the membership program is you get to see you get 2 free documentaries every single month that we make in shop. So we film twice. We release videos twice a month. They're between 10 and 20 minutes long usually. Yeah. And they're either deep dives into pieces of evidence or features of things in the museum, or more often than not, it's our own field work because we go out in the field. One of us is usually out in the field at least once or twice a week, that sort of thing. So we film it every time we go. And we don't release everything, and not that we're hiding anything, but really most times things don't happen. Yeah. But even when things don't happen, we still make videos out of it and put it out because people think by watching television, Finding Bigfoot, we had a really good track record. We got Bigfoots over half the time. And dude, if you're batting over 50%, you're a Hall of Famer, in baseball, right? Right. But that gives that skews the perception of the viewer that it's easier said than done. The reason we were so successful on Finding Bigfoot is that we had Matt Moneymaker at the BFRO database with tens of thousands of sightings, and my own database that had 1,500 sightings, and our contacts throughout the country. We're going to West Virginia. Well, we're going to talk to Dr. Russ Jones because he's there, and he's out in the field all the time, and he has the best line of information. We're going to Kentucky. We're calling Tom Shea. We have friends and colleagues who do this very seriously all over the country. And so we always had the best, most recent intel. Okay. That's why we were successful. But frankly, Bigfooting's not always like that. You don't have that luxury. If you're just going out to your spot to see if something's happening, you're lucky to bat 10%. But because of that, in the museum for our membership videos, we do put out boring videos every once in a while because it's important to educate the public that most of the time nothing happens. And that is a service, whether the people watching the video think it or not. Yeah. That is a service of reality, a little dose of reality for our viewers.
Yeah, wonderful. We're just about out of time, but I wanted to ask you a question that you could speak directly to these folks. What would you say to somebody that is new, just wants to get into being a Bigfoot researcher or, out tracking for the beast? What advice would you give them?
First stop is the library, essentially, or the metaphoric library, although real libraries need our help as well. Get your nose in a book. Get it off of YouTube. Get it off of the internet. Get it off of Instagram or wherever your fancy goes. Get out of there, okay? Go to a book. Read books with people with PhD after their name. The number one book to go to is Dr. Meldrum's book, Sasquatch Legend Meets Science. I'm rereading it for probably the 12th or 14th time right now. It's something I revisit every single year. Dr. Kranz's book is fantastic. That is the foundation on which Dr. Meldrum, of course, built his knowledge and his data collection and whatnot. Then there's Dr. Bindernagel's stuff, who does a wonderful job not only explaining why scientists are not interested in the subject, but should be, but also drawing correlations between Sasquatch behaviors from John Green's database and Jane Goodall's and Diane Fossey's studies and whatnot. So go to those books first. Read books. Then go to the classics, John Green's books and all those sort of things. Read about sightings. And everybody loves sightings for some reason. So that's what I would do. Number one is read books. Learn about that. Learn about the history of the thing you're about ready to participate in. And other than that, as far as field work goes, you should probably look at the BFRO database or any of the other excellent databases online of your particular area, and then find a cluster of reports. Now, normally a cluster in any sort of real meaningful statistical way would be a dozen or so reports, but Bigfoot, we don't have that luxury. A cluster of reports in Bigfoot would be 2, 3, 4, 5 sightings, all within a few miles. That is a cluster of reports in Bigfoot. It's a low data, it's a low sample set, but that's what we have. And start going there, because my recent work, my last couple of years, is strongly indicating that Sasquatches don't move around that much. And it doesn't even matter for
so
time
there's
of
no
year.
mass migration from the coast to the inland and back.
No, that's all nonsense. People can think that, and that's cute. That's great. But why are they basing it? Why are they thinking that is the real question? And it usually comes down to a gut feeling. That's no way to run things. That's no way to decide things. The actual data of tracking individuals over time that we were talking about earlier indicates that they're usually in the same general area. And that area is pretty big, 10, 15, maybe even 20 miles square on each side.
Yeah.
That's pretty big, but they're generally in there, and so you can kind of keep track of them in there. So find a spot with a cluster and just go there as much as you can and start walking the roads. Start walking the roads, visiting the ponds and the lakes and muddy areas. Keep looking for footprints, because if you find a handful of footprints over a few years, you're going to find that some of those footprints are probably from the same animal, and then you're onto something, and then you're starting to crack the case a little bit. So that's what I would do. Your best piece of equipment you can bring with you. It's not thermal imagers. It's not fancy night vision. It's none of that. It's a journal. A spiral-bound notebook is probably the most powerful piece of data gathering equipment you can possibly bring in the woods. Date, time, moon phase, weather conditions, temperature, blah, blah, blah. Nothing happened? Great, write it down.
That sounds like work.
It is work. Negative, but even if nothing happens, write that down too, because negative data is still data, and you want to keep track of that stuff. And it's as simple as that. If you want to get fancy and get technological, then go ahead and get an audio recorder. Sounds are some of the easiest things you can gather that might be Sasquatch related. I always, your smartphone's probably good enough of a camera if you don't want to invest in a video camera. And the number one thing now I told you how to do it, now let me tell you why to do it. Because you enjoy it. That's why you should do this, because it's good for you to get outside and enjoy nature and enjoy the public lands, and it's good exercise, it's good for your soul, it's good for your mind. Do it because it makes you feel good. Ignore everybody. Don't even bother sharing your stuff with people outside your circles, because there's a lot of sociopaths in the Bigfoot community, and they're more than happy to tear you down and belittle you and try to destroy you, even if they've never even met you. So do it because you enjoy it and you get something out of this. Don't even have to share it with anybody. Just go because you like it. That's my advice.
Wonderful. Absolutely. That's beautiful. And that's the best reason to do it right there, my man.
Yeah.
You said it. Well, folks, it's been wonderful having Cliff here, but we're out of time. So we'll see you again next week.
This show is sponsored by Extreme Expeditions Northwest LLC, your gateway to adventure, specializing in guided Bigfoot expeditions to Alaska and throughout the Pacific Northwest and Canada.
There's a fable of a beast that once roamed this land. Some say still exists as a big tall ape man. Stand